Good afternoon. We are here with James Williams, the managing partner of the Seattle office for Perkins Coie. Welcome, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. It is a delight to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So I want to start off by asking you a couple questions about your background, how you started, where your roots are from, and how you essentially became the attorney that you are today.
Yes, I'm originally from South Carolina. I grew up on a farm in the middle of the state, a place called Rembert, South Carolina. It is very rural, probably a population 400. It's about an hour and a half from the capital city of Columbia, South Carolina. My father was a farmer, my mother was a school teacher, and I grew up doing farm work, driving tractors, driving combines, picking cotton, all the traditional things that you would expect that goes along with being a farm laborer. And at some point, I decided that farming wasn't quite for me, and I wanted something that was a little more challenging. So I decided that I would go into the military and recognize that historically the military was a place for people to improve their station in life. So I enrolled at a place called the Citadel. It's a military college in Charleston, South Carolina. After my first semester, I was fortunate enough to get an Air Force ROTC scholarship to attend college, and the government paid for that. And then they gave me a deferral of my active duty commitment to go to law school at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. When I finished Charlottesville, I started my career as a judge advocate in the United States Air Force. The government sent me to Enid, Oklahoma, and then to Ramstein Air Base, Germany, and then to a base in a place called San Vito dei Normanni, Italy. It's in near a city called Brindisi, Italy. It's in the heel of the boot. And from there, I made the decision that I'd served my country, and it was time to think about putting down roots somewhere to actually practice law. While I was going through that process of evaluating law firms in the southeastern U.S., primarily where I'm from, in South Carolina, in Georgia, in North Carolina, I got a call out of the blue from one of my law school classmates, a woman named Marcella Fleming Reed.
Okay.
And Marcella had used this thing called the worldwide locator system that the Department of Defense had set up then to find military people. So she was able to track me down first in Germany, and then they told her that I'd moved to Italy, and they gave her the number for the base legal office. So she called me one night about 7:30 p.m. while I was getting ready for a trial, and that's how the Seattle journey began. She convinced me that I should include Seattle on the list of places I was looking at and considering for practicing law. I didn't take it seriously at the time, but she insisted on me sending my resume and my transcript and my writing samples to her, and she managed to set up 4 interviews in Seattle for me with Perkins Coie, Davis Wright, Hessel Fetterman, and Lane Powell. And when she called me back in Italy to tell me that she'd set up these interviews, I was stunned because I had already set up interviews for myself in South Carolina and Georgia with firms that I had either worked with before or I had anticipated that I had an interest in. So I did all my serious interviewing on the East Coast first, and in deference to Marcella, I added Seattle to the end of the interview schedule, and I came out here and was blown away for a variety of reasons. I thought that the environment obviously was beautiful, but I thought the lawyers in all the firms were excellent, really smart people, really good people, and started thinking seriously about coming to Seattle. But I wasn't quite convinced. I went back to Brindisi, Italy, and I was sitting there in my apartment, and again, 7:30 at night, the phone rings. This time it's the hiring partner from Perkins Coie calling me in Brindisi to tell me he thought I could be successful here in Seattle, and he was hopeful that I would accept the offer. So by then I started to get the feeling that perhaps this is divine intervention.
Right.
Because I go from zero knowledge of Seattle well, limited. I knew what it was, to within 120 days, 90 days actually, seriously considering Seattle as a place to move. After that call with the Perkins Coie hiring partner, I thought about it seriously and said, there are very few opportunities you'll have to try something different and new, so give it a shot. I was not married. I didn't really have anything tying me necessarily to the Southeast, so I came out here in 1993 and started my career at Perkins Coie as what they call a lateral associate, someone who already had some experience but was essentially new to the firm. I'd never done a summer associate stint here, never had any contact with anyone beyond the people I interviewed with, and started making connections and developing relationships from zero.
Wow. To go back to your journey to Seattle, you'd never been to Seattle before. You picked up and moved. At that point in your career, when you were in Italy, were you thinking about coming back stateside, or where were you in your career at that time?
I was actually thinking about two things. One, the Air Force wanted me to move to Bolling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. to be what's called a regional trial lawyer, basically trying all the felony cases for the Air Force up and down the East Coast at the Air Force bases, which was attractive to me because I enjoy trial work. But I also thought about the fact that as a single person, they'd moved me 3 times in 4 years, and I recognize that single officers are easy to be picked off and moved pretty much at any point that the government wants. So I was more motivated about putting down roots in a place that I could start to practice and create a sense of community. So with that decision made, then the question is, where do you want to live? And in evaluating Seattle versus South Carolina, it was a fairly easy decision. I looked at a variety of things to include the political structure. In the South at that time, it was white male dominated. Mm-hmm. And I was very surprised pleasantly to see that in Seattle at the time they had a black mayor, a guy named Norm Rice, and the guy in charge of the county was Gary Locke, an Asian American. And I did the math and recognized that there were only 6% of the population in Seattle was African American, and probably 15% was Asian. Mm-hmm. So it very quickly dawned on me that the white people in the region were very comfortable placing power in the hands of people who were diverse, which was completely opposite from what I had experienced in the South, and was a total surprise to me. And it made me feel that Seattle was a place where merit was more important than the color or the gender of the person. So I thought it would be fertile ground to see if I was able to practice at the highest level, which I always wanted to do. So that's how I made the decision to come to Seattle, in addition to the very warm overture from the hiring partner who became one of my mentors.
Okay, the practice of law can be very isolating. So how did you find your community once you came to Seattle?
I immediately got involved with this thing called the Lauren Miller Bar Association. And the Lauren Miller Bar Association is the Washington affiliate of this thing called the National Bar Association. And going back even further, the National Bar Association was created in the 1920s because the American Bar Association wouldn't allow black people to be members. So black lawyers wanted to have a place where they could talk about the latest developments in the law, to do professional development in the network. So National Bar Association was created, and in various cities throughout the country, local affiliates started to be created. The Lauren Miller Bar Association was created here in Seattle in 1968 by people like Judge Charles Johnson, Gary Gayton, Lem Howell, and others who were really civil rights litigators and also personal injury lawyers who had a relationship with a guy named Lauren Miller. And Lauren Miller was famous because he was one of the lawyers who litigated a Supreme Court case called Shelley versus Kramer, which is the landmark case which struck down restrictive covenants in land transactions. So once upon a time, white people could put a restriction in their deeds saying you can't sell to blacks or Jews or Latinos or anybody of color. And that case set the precedent that that was no longer constitutional. So they were very impressed with Lauren Miller. He'd come up here to visit them several times, and they decided to name the organization after him. So in 1968, they started it. It was a Lauren Miller Bar Club at the time, and it continues to this day as the Lauren Miller Bar Association. I had the honor of serving as the secretary of Lauren Miller and then ultimately the president in 1998. And during that journey with Lauren Miller, I met all of the African American lawyers who are now still very close friends and allies of mine. I would say Ron Ward was one of those people, Paula Boggs, Judge Richard Jones, Bonnie Glenn, Karen Murray, you name Lim Howe, you name, and even your father, Ray Connell. I met him through the Lauren Miller Bar Association. So it has been what I consider the launch pad for a lot of my activities outside of the practice of law at Perkins Coie.
And so you mentioned outside of the practice of law. What do you do outside the practice of law? What does your life look like outside of Perkins Coie?
First and foremost, I love being a lawyer. It's my calling. It's the thing that I think animates my life. So I enjoy all parts of being a lawyer, to include bar activities. I did a lot with Lauren Miller, but I then started working a lot with the American Bar Association. I became what's called a delegate to the American Bar Association House of Delegates. The House of Delegates is responsible for setting policy for the profession, so they're the ones who create the model rules of professional conduct, model rules for judicial conduct. They're the ones who do the accreditation of law schools throughout the country, and the House of Delegates is essentially the legislature where lawyers from all over the country get together and debate policy resolutions that they think should be embraced by bar associations all across the country and by Congress, depending on the nature of the issue. So I started doing that, and I'm now serving my last year as the Washington State delegate, meaning I lead the delegation of all of the lawyers who are participating in the House on behalf of the state of Washington. And when I finish my term in August, I will start serving in the ABA Board of Governors. Wow. So that starts in August, and I get to play at a higher level on the issue of making policy for lawyers across the country. I'm excited about that. In addition to the legal stuff, non-legal stuff, well, you could call it quasi-legal. Things like the Washington Leadership Institute certainly played a role in that. I'm a member of the board for the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. I'm a member of the board of this organization called Citizen University, which was created by a very dear friend of mine named Eric Liu, and its purpose is to evangelize democracy, which I think is a very important thing for all Americans. And other than that, I'm also involved in some local fraternities here in town.
So you mentioned the Washington Leadership Institute and Ron Ward. So how did you get, or how did you receive the call to serve WLI?
Pretty simple. Ron Ward had just been elected as the incoming president of the Washington State Bar Association in 2004. We were all very proud of him. And then Ron asked me to go to lunch. And of course, you don't turn down the president of the bar if he wants to go to lunch. So we went to lunch, and I thought it was a lovely conversation. And Ron was telling me about all of his plans, and I was saying, those are great ideas. I think you ought to pursue all of them. And then he mentioned, I got this idea about a leadership training program for young lawyers. I said, that's a great idea. You ought to pursue that. And then Ron looked at me and said, and I want you to lead it. And I stopped laughing. And I said, you got to understand, at the time, I was billing a lot of hours I was a relatively junior partner at Perkins in 2004 with a lot of responsibilities. And I had never run a leadership program before, and I didn't know the first thing about it. And I told Ron very directly that I was flattered he would consider me, but there's so many other lawyers in town who probably have more seniority and gravitas and ability to do that than I would. And I thought he should get one of those other people to do it. And then Ron took a few bites, and then he said, "No, I want you to do this for me." And then I had a dilemma. The president of the bar says, "I'm not accepting the no. Will you do this for me?" And I then said, I'll think about it. So the WLI was not a new concept. Ron had traveled the country in his preparation to become president of the state bar, and he'd seen versions of the WLI in Missouri and in Maryland and maybe one other state. And he'd taken the materials from those programs when he visited, and that's what he gave me. He said, "Take a look at these and see what you can come up with." And I looked at them and thought that they were okay, but they were essentially 1 or 2 session programs where the primary goal was just to meet people. There wasn't any real training element to it. It was essentially a small segment of what WLI does, which is introducing young lawyers to people who are of seniority and importance in the community. And I then sat down and said, okay, if you were going to map this out, how would you do it? And I said, well, what are the things I wish I had known and that someone had told me when I started the journey? And that's how the curriculum was born. And it turns out it's 8 because I could only think of 8 things that came to mind. The first one was, I wish I had known about leadership training. I wish somebody had sat down with me and said, okay, here's what a leader is supposed to look like, sound like, feel like. And why don't we have a session about that? And then I went about scoping out, okay, what does that look like? And then I said, well, I wish I could have been told about what it takes to be successful as a lawyer. And that's how the nuts and bolts of practice of law came to be, because I thought it was important for a leader to also be a good lawyer. I think you have greater authority when you speak as a leader when people think you're good at what you do. And then I thought about, well, what are the things that are out there that nobody's talking about that are also essential to being successful in getting good results? And I thought about the legislature. You know, lawyers are always mired in the case law and judges, but the bigger picture is, how do you get those laws made, and how can you influence policies that might allow your client to either avoid the issue altogether or at least be better prepared to deal with the issue when it comes through in the form of a statute. So the whole point of the legislative process was to teach what it was about, to introduce people to Olympia if they'd never been there before, and to essentially spark that idea about being more comprehensive in their ability to represent the client beyond just the case law and just the courts. And then I also thought, you know, it would have been nice if someone had talked to me about other parts of the state, because I don't think you can be a leader in Washington if you don't have any knowledge or exposure beyond the Puget Sound. And that's why we started going to Spokane. Spokane was the first choice because it's the largest city outside of the Puget Sound, and it has its own culture and community and its own leaders. And I thought it was important for young leaders to be exposed to people on the other side of the state and to get an understanding of how they feel about things. Also important, I thought, was understanding the bar process. We don't have that session anymore, but the original outline that I created had a session purely dedicated to understanding how the bar works, and that was the name of it. So we had people who were from the American Bar Association, people who were from the State Bar Association, people from the various county bar associations, giving a tutorial essentially on how those organizations function and how or where the young lawyers could find a way to plug in. Another session was on meeting the judges. I thought it was important, especially for those who are litigating, to have greater comfort around the people who are the decision makers that we're going to be appearing in front of. So we had a session where we specifically targeted getting the WLI members in front of members of the Supreme Court, federal judges, Superior Court judges, tribal judges, judges who did administrative law, the entire gamut of the judiciary, all for the purpose of making sure they knew and felt comfortable appearing before them. And then, there was the issue that always comes up as a young lawyer, and I thought about it. Young lawyers are always faced with the question of if and when to pivot and change course on their careers. So we had a session that was dedicated to the private versus public sector practice. And we had people who were essentially veterans who had done both, either had started in the public sector and gone public, or started in the public sector and gone private, or had done multiple tours of duty on both sides. So they could educate the WLI members on how they did that transition, why they did the transition, and the things you should be considering if you are thinking about making a transition. And I can't remember, there are a couple of other sessions that came to mind when I was mapping out the operating instructions for how we were going to actually make this thing work. So I met with Ron in August for lunch. I started putting together the operating instructions and the planning for the WLI in September. I gave Ron the proposed operating plan memo with the sessions mapped out, with the organizational structure for selection of members, the whole minimum 3 years, maximum 10-year thing, total number of WLI members, and the list of people who were already either on the board or we thought we should target for the board. And then Ron took that to the State Bar Association in October. And we had a fairly consequential meeting with the State Bar where they had to decide whether they were going to agree to my proposed budget of $50,000, because I mapped out the numbers based on the head count. How much was it going to cost for food and transportation for these 12 people and some advisors to meet and to travel for that 8-month period? And it came out to roughly $50,000. And lo and behold, the State Bar was completely on board with the concept. They struggled with the $50,000 because they didn't want to give up the money, because this was a new concept. They didn't know whether it was going to work, and that's a lot of money to give to these kids who are barely in the bar. And I understood that, but they voted and approved the program in mid-October. We then advertised the program late October. November, we got, I want to say, about 60 applicants for the 12 spots. And by November, right before Thanksgiving, we selected the 12. Wow. And we kicked it off in January of 2005. So that's the progression of how it started. The first year was really hard because, again, it was new and we were starting from scratch. So we spent a lot of time on the first session. I still remember who was involved in structuring. It was me, Ron, Sharon Sakamoto, Anthony Gipe, and I think we hired a consultant who had expertise on leadership. And that person gave us essentially the concepts that we should be teaching and the styles of leadership that we should be teaching. And then Ron and I strategized on the speakers who would be the best representatives to talk about and model those leadership examples for the fellows. I think it was Mary Fairhurst and maybe Richard Jones the first year because he was on the board. Mary did collaborative leadership. I think Judge Jones did commander leadership. And I think Rick Martinez was the first one to do, Richard Martinez was the first to do the servant leadership version. Of course, Judge Martinez was griping at the outset because he wanted to be the commander. I said, well, not everybody can be a commander, and you're great at leadership by example. So anyway, once we lined that up, we started the first session, and it turned out far better than we expected. Of course, we had no expectations of what was going to happen. And then in that first leadership session, we also introduced that second day training on race and gender and LGBTQ issues and how to deal with those as a leader. And I think they've separated that now to have a separate session on that, but that was originally a part of the first session on leadership, the day 2 part of leadership. And then, we just followed the outline. We ran the play. So we did, I think Olympia was second. We did the legislative process, and third was the nuts and bolts of practice, and then on and on and on.
So after the first session, why did you continue on with WLI, or why did you continue to have additional cohorts after that?
Two-part question. So after the first session, which was exhausting, we were shocked at the feedback on the evaluations. They were off the charts in terms of the level of enthusiasm and engagement from the fellows. They absolutely loved the leadership examples. And what's not to love? You got Mary First, you got Richard Jones, you've got Ricardo Martinez talking to you about leadership and role modeling various versions. And then you have the second day, an extraordinarily emotional and compelling conversation about race and gender and sexual orientation, with conversations that they'd never had anywhere with anyone. And we looked at the feedback and said, I think we might be onto something, at least with session 1, because we've touched a nerve and it's resonating. The other thing that we didn't know was that the gelling cohesion process had really gotten underway with that first weekend, having them basically at a retreat and getting to know one another and to bond. And that bonding happened immediately after the first session. So we said, okay, this is good. Let's see what happens. We continued on with all the other sessions, and we continued to get sterling feedback from all of the fellows, literally on all of the presentations and presenters throughout that entire year. And we thought that was pretty good. And then we got to the end, the last session, And that's when the light bulb went on in my head that we had to keep doing it. And here's why. We didn't have a graduation because we didn't know what we were doing. We just said, okay, it's over. And then the fellows wanted to share what they had learned in the 8-month journey, and it was an incredibly powerful moment. And I'd say 8 of the 12 were crying about the experience, like literally crying about how meaningful it was to them, how much they had learned during the course of it, how much they had bonded and felt like they had a sense of community that they didn't have before, how it had changed their lives. That was the one that got me. It had changed their lives. I was thinking, well, yeah, I know the program was good, but I don't know what's changing anybody's life. So when I said, when we heard that, Ron and I looked at each other and said, I guess we can't just do one. We're going to have to keep doing this and see whether or not we can change some other lives. So I would say at the end of that first session, or first year, we felt very comfortable that the program had legs and that it had something that was of interest and of value to young lawyers in the market. And that's how we kicked it off. Now, you asked the question, was there another question on that?
I think you answered it.
Okay.
And so the next question is, what was your last year as co-chair?
I think probably the best thing we did was to have Justice Yu come in as co-chair, because the first year was so hard going to each and every session as the chair. And then I actually ran as a coordinator probably 5 of the 8 sessions. So I was physically exhausted, and I did have a day job as well as doing that work. And as much as I enjoyed spending the time with the young lawyers and watching them grow and mature, I didn't think that was sustainable. So Mary Yu was a breath of fresh air. She came in, I think in the second year, and we were co-chairs together, and she quickly made an impact, especially on the session dealing with meeting the judges, because she had a span of contacts that was unparalleled to anyone else we had in the WLI. And it showed not only in the number of judges she was able to bring, but also with respect to the programming she put in place for that part of the WLI. And to this day, I think that is one of the best parts of the WLI. And I think that the changes over time that I noticed was that
that was going to be my next question. How have you seen it evolve?
Now, here's the funny part. The WLI fellows stayed the same age over the last 20 years, but I got older. It's the funniest thing. I said, these seem like the same age people every year. And it dawned on me, it's like, of course, 3 to 10 years. And the window's there, and you get a new crop every 3 to 10 years who's coming in. But I think the changes were for the better. We had new and different board members come in with different ideas about how to do things. And it was gratifying for me to see a sense of ownership develop in the board members who came along later, because they then started to see it as their program. And that gave me full confidence to believe that program's not about me, it's about itself. And it's got something of resonance within the community and within the market. So I'm no longer necessary. I guess I became not irrelevant, but I think unnecessary for the program. And that's exactly what I was hoping to happen. So the succession to Craig and Erica I thought was great. And the timing was perfect because it gave me the latitude to do a lot of other things, especially over the last 3 years, because part of my day job here at Perkins Coie was moving us from that building, 1201, to this building where we are right now, 1301. And the level of commitment for time and energy ratcheted up significantly. So when I left WLI, I think 3 years ago, was right about the time when it got to be really intense with respect to closing the deal on the lease, dealing with the construction issues, socializing the idea of the move, just the logistics and the planning that went along with trying to move 370 lawyers and 600 staff people from one building to the next was so time consuming that I don't think I could have given the WLI my best self. So I'm very happy that the transition happened, and you guys are here, so obviously it's still doing just fine.
As WLI evolved, you also evolved during that period. So what did that look like from your standpoint to watch the landscape of law change as well as WLI and your own personal career growth?
You know, the evolution was not just of me, but also my co-chair, Mary Yu. We both grew and ascended during that period. Mary, when she started, was on the Superior Court bench, and I was a relatively junior partner at Perkins Coie. And over time, Mary then was selected by the governor to go on the Washington Supreme Court. And in 2017, I was asked to take on the role of managing partner for the Seattle office for Perkins Coie. So we both incrementally continued to proceed in our careers to get older and hopefully wiser. But I think more importantly for the WLI's purposes, our networks expanded. So that gave us greater ability to call on speakers and to provide opportunities and access to the fellows that we would not have had earlier on in the program. So I think all of that was good.
So now that we're at the 20-year mark and you've watched fellows grow in their careers from the 3 to 10 years that they've been practicing law, that they came into the WLI fellowship, to launching incredible careers in their trajectory, and you've been able to watch that. What has been your hope for the WLI fellows as you watch them grow?
From the outset, my personal goal, and I think the organization shared this goal, was threefold. First, it was all about accelerating the skill level of the fellows who came in to make them better lawyers. Second, it was about accelerating the maturation process for them to be more seasoned and experienced lawyers faster. And the third was to accelerate their network so that they had connections that would allow them to be stronger leaders faster. So the goal was to train people, give them the tools to be super effective wherever they were, anywhere in the state, and have the ability to call on people anywhere in the state to help them in their leadership capacities. And I think that goal is still being realized by the WLI to this day. Now, the things we never thought about or didn't fully appreciate at the time were, first, that the WLI would have a statewide impact. We, of course, thought we'd get a cohort that would be representative of a lot of people in the Puget Sound, a lot of practice areas. What we didn't know was the reach of the program would be statewide. So, for example, my favorite example is Bonnie Hunt. I think it's Hunt. She's over in Pend Oreille County. She's black. She's the sitting prosecutor in Pend Oreille County, and she's a WLI grad. At the time, she was just a prosecutor, an assistant prosecutor who went through the program. But she's an example of the reach of the program going places we never anticipated before, all over the state, in counties we never thought about before. Pend Oreille's one, Walla Walla's another, Vancouver's another, Bellingham, middle of the state, you name it. We've had fellows almost everywhere, and that's allowed the influence of the program to really be statewide and for it to be a statewide program. I think that was something that we hadn't thought about at the outset. The second thing was we didn't realize that the WLI would be the best investment of state bar money that the state bar would ever make. And here's why. It is one of the very few tangible things the state bar can point to that it does or did with your money. $50,000 that they give per year, which, by the way, we stayed at for, I want to say 15 or 17 years, flat, $50,000. because we started getting contributions from law firms and people contributing to the program. It gave the state bar more presence and gravitas in places where it really was only seen as a source of licensing or as an organization that would just take money from people who were there. They could see on the ground the materialization of their bar dues through the WLI. And the third thing we didn't think about was what these people would be doing. Nobody went into this program saying, oh, we're going to have somebody who's going to be the Attorney General of the state of Washington. That was never on the radar. All we were thinking about was, how can we help these young lawyers be the best, most effective leaders they can be, and hopefully pass it on. One of the points of the program is to have that ripple effect where the WLI fellows have that knowledge, that information that they've gotten through the program, and can then pass it on within their bar organizations, within their communities, so that we can have good examples of leadership popping up all over the state. And the windfall for the program has been just the amazing results in terms of the people and the careers.
Now that we are at the 20-year mark, and you've been part of the program from 2005 to 2025, what is your vision for the next 20 years of this program? So that's my first question, and then I want to follow up with, are you familiar with any other programs? Are there any programs like this, or are you familiar with any other programs like this with any other state bars?
Yeah, let me start with a reverse question. When we started having success with the WLI, we started getting notice at the ABA level. American Bar Association gave us some award, I think, after the third year. And then the other states started having interest in what we were doing. So we would freely send them all of our operating instructions. And there were attempts made at creating WLI replicas in Oregon, in Arizona, in Nevada, maybe Colorado. There are several efforts made, and I think they all failed. I know the one in Oregon failed because they violated one of our fundamental rules, which was no more than 12. They couldn't get their heads around limiting their class size, so they went big and let more people in than they could actually train at once. So they had like a class of 30 or 40 people, which, as you know, that makes it a little unwieldy and really hard to get to know the people who are in your class. We wanted it to be small, and we wanted it to be intimate so that the people in the class could truly get to know one another.
Right.
And I think that's a fundamental part of the magic of the program. I think some bars got so enamored with it and the results they saw in Washington, they thought, well, why don't we let everybody in and just make it as big as possible? And that was, I think, a mistake on their part. The other thing is, we had an advisory board that was fundamentally dedicated to making this successful. And we chose people who had a vested interest in advancing the careers of the fellows who came in the program. I don't know if the advisory boards in those other states were similarly situated. A lot of times there's a temptation to just put people on boards because of their name or who they are, and it's an honorific. The WLI advisory board has always been expected to actually do the work, to actually take on sessions, to train, to solicit speakers, to actually be participants in how we actually executed on the program. So I think the other states never got that message. So right now, WLI probably is one of a kind.
So you've been involved with WLI from 2005 to 2025. And so what is your vision, or what is your hope for WLI for the next 20 years and beyond?
Pretty simple. I think the people who are going through the program are supposed to be the next generation of leaders. So my assumption is that at some point, the folks who've gone through the cohorts will recognize that the program has value, and they feel like they want to be as dedicated to it as Ron and I were at the beginning.
So we've seen an attack on attorneys recently, and WLI is focused on younger attorneys now, or excuse me, young attorneys. What do you think the challenges are, or what do you believe the challenges will be for young attorneys who are coming up through the program, and also future lawyers who maybe are in law school now or have recently passed the bar, who are starting their careers in this climate? What do you think their challenges are, and how do you think they can overcome them?
That's a harder question. I assume you're talking about Perkins Coie being attacked by the president through his executive order. You know, I can laugh about it now, but those were some dark days in March when we first got the executive order, because we're the first law firm in the history of the United States ever to receive an executive order from the President of the United States essentially designed to put us out of business. So we took it seriously. It was an existential threat to our existence, and I think we did the right thing by coming out and fighting about it versus capitulating and giving the president what he wanted, because so much more was at stake than the practice of law. It was about the Constitution. It was about the First Amendment and the right to express yourself. It was about the right to have your choice of counsel. It was about viewpoint expression and the right under the First Amendment to be able to say what you feel without the government being able to persecute you or prosecute you for it. So those are principles that drove us to fight, and fortunately to have a lot of other law firms nationwide and retired judges and the Attorney General of Washington. Shout out to Nick Brown for being the first amicus brief filed in support of our case in the District of Columbia. And I think the lesson learned from that experience is you can't sacrifice the Constitution and the rule of law. If you really are a lawyer and you really believe in that stuff, then that's not negotiable. So the question about what the young lawyers will be facing in the future are the same challenges that you saw play out on the national stage with big law. There's always going to be the temptation to use the law degree for the purpose of making money, or using your law degree for the purpose of doing something that's right. And there are those in the profession who swear the oath, but they don't really mean it, because the real purpose of their being there is to maximize their earning potential. And I think you saw that play out with all the big law firms that chose to capitulate to the president because, quite frankly, they said they wanted to continue to make money. And in order to do that, they had to give the president what he wanted. That's the challenge, I think, that will continue to be there for all the young lawyers. Which is it going to be? Do you believe in the stuff that you swore an oath to, or do you not? And those who really believe in it are going to be the true patriots that I think will be the leaders and will be the people who will be at the vanguard of protecting democracy in this country.
Thank you. And with that, what advice do you have for young lawyers, not just in WLI now, but young lawyers who are maybe just have passed the bar, who've been practicing, who are thinking about pivoting in their careers, and also who have been practicing for a number of years and just kind of looking for just some inspiration, some advice?
My first thing would be spend the time to master the craft. You have to be good at what you do before you do anything else, because that's how you're going to be judged. How you write, how you speak. That's really all there is to the lawyer craft itself, whether it's transactional work or it's litigation trial work. That's how people will decide whether or not you're good. And I think if you're going to be of value to your community, you've really got to invest the time and energy to master the craft. And there's no easy way to do it. I think Malcolm Gladwell had a book called Outliers, and he talked about the 10,000 hour rule. And if you're practicing law, that comes to about 7.5 or 8 years of practicing law, billing roughly 1,800 to 1,900 hours per year in order to actually get to the point where you are good enough to say you've mastered the craft. It takes a long time to be good at it. And just realize that. Don't get frustrated about it. Just buckle up, do the work, and then when you look up in 8 years, you will be someone who people look at and say, I want to hire that person, or that person is knowledgeable. That's somebody who I think I want to get the opinion from because I think they know what they're talking about. Second thing I would say is try to find something about the law that you're passionate about, something that really is of interest to you, and not necessarily the money, something that excites you. One of the things that I find most interesting is My spouse laughs at me because she says, "You're the only guy I know who really loves getting up to go to work every morning." I was like, "Yeah." She said, "Everybody else is finding reasons to stay at home, and you want to go into the workplace." And I thought about it, and I said, "You know what? It's true. I do that because I get great joy out of my colleagues and out of the practice. And that's a sweet spot in life. When you know what you're doing it because you're passionate and you enjoy it. I think that is the thing that makes practicing law now really such an enjoyable thing for me. And the last thing I would say is, don't focus on the law to get rich. There are very few lawyers who get mega rich. If you want to be rich, don't be a lawyer. Go into business. Be a business person, found a startup, go to a startup, blow up and be Amazon. Do something like that that's profit oriented. Because lawyers sell their time. And at the end of the day, that's finite. So you're never going to be able to make more than a certain amount as a lawyer practicing. What we do is we provide a service to people who need advice. And we make a good living at it. And just don't get caught up on whether or not you are mega rich as a result of being a lawyer, because that's really not the purpose of this.
Thank you. That was James Williams, managing partner at Perkins Coie, based in Seattle, Washington. It was great to have this conversation with James and hear about his life experiences and his perspectives on being a lawyer. He has been a true leader in our legal community and a driving force behind the growth and success of the Washington Leadership Institute. I'm Bianca Connell-Flint, and this has been Voices That Move Us, a project by the Washington Leadership Institute. Thank you for listening.